All right. Hey, well, we are here with another podcast to talk about the food tech news, and we have a special guest today, Rachel Konrad. I'm so excited to have you. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I love being here with Carlos and Michael. It's a huge honor, super fun, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah. We were all in Vegas together just about 2-3 weeks ago, and it's so funny. We were just talking in the pre-show. I've made it through actually 3 CESs, because CS 2020, I think, actually was a COVID super spreader event. I went to 2022, and this year I thought I had super immunity because I hadn't got it yet. I was like a COVID immunity strongman, 3 years, and then I just got it when I got back.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know numerous people who suffered the same fate. But
I didn't get it. I didn't get it in Vegas. I got it from my son visiting me in my living room. I went to Vegas, didn't get it, came home. My son visited me, and then I got it just hanging out in my living room.
Wow. Oh, I'm sorry. And how badly did you get it? Was it a pretty...
It's the ones that love you that always hurt you the most, right?
That's what I was going for, yeah.
It was pretty minor. I still am testing positive.
Yeah.
But in terms of symptoms, it was like a minor cold.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. I actually suffered pretty bad brain fog for months afterward. I'm fine now, but it was really worrisome. You could kind of really start to get a glimpse of what, dementia looks like or something. And it was awful. I would just go carry with me everywhere my old reporter's notebooks and write copious notes for every single thing to do, to remember, to get to. Yeah, it was really alarming.
Maybe you can use those notes for something good though now. Who knows?
It's for my book. It's for my
book. You might want to burn the notes. Who knows? But has the brain fog dissipated? Or you feel like you're back to old Rachel?
Absolutely. Yeah, it dissipated. It took a long time, a lot longer than I thought, 6 months maybe. What really helped, and I will tell you this, Michael, what really helped was sleeping. I started going to bed an extra 2 hours early, and that's really what got me fully back. So highly recommend it.
Sleep is always a good recommended cure for a lot of things. But we're going to talk a little bit about CES, but before we do that, let's hear a little bit about you. So the audience who doesn't know you, some might. Rachel, you have a great background. You were a journalist, I think, a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think CNET and some others, and I can always tell by when we have our conversations, you still have that journalist eye for a lot of the stories. And I think, interestingly, to a lot of people, I think most people, you then went to work for Elon Musk.
Yeah, I was a journalist for about 13 years, and including at newspapers around the country and in my hometown of Detroit. I moved in 2000 out to Silicon Valley to cover the what I thought was the boom, ended up being covering the bust at CNET, and then I took a job at the Associated Press. So big, old school mainline wire service, one of the biggest news organizations in the world. And, it was really interesting because one of the things that consistently kept pissing me off about being a reporter is this concept of, objectivity, right? Unbiased objectivity. And so what that meant effectively as a passionate environmentalist is that I basically had to quote climate deniers and other jackasses, whether that was covering the Detroit auto industry or covering global warming out here in California. And I really hated that. And so, in 2008, I made this really big decision to just leave journalism. I thought I'm going to be much more useful applying my time and intellect to something that is much more directly taking charge of reversing climate change and global warming. And so at the time, I applied to this completely obscure company. All of my friends back in Detroit in my hometown were like, "What are you doing? That's insane. Don't even bother." And that was a company called Tesla. On my third day, Elon did this massive riff, fired a third of the staff, and I was reporting directly to him. In my first job outside of journalism, right, helping this company which was really on death's doorstep. I mean, just like today, the doors of Sand Hill Road venture capital industry were bolted shut. We could not get fundraising moving. Elon put in his last, $40 or $50 million from his PayPal sale, And that's kind of what got the company through to the next step, which was launching the Model S and then getting a Daimler, $50 million from Daimler, $50 million from Toyota, which, by the way, in the auto industry, that is nothing. That's like an afterthought joke. But to us, it was literally payroll and taxes and kept the lights on. And then, of course, Tesla, went stratospheric in the decade after that. But it was really, really dark days. So I definitely, I worked for Elon, but I don't pretend to know Elon, the richest person in the world. I was working for Tesla and Elon when, the fate of the company was likely catastrophic demise, right? But we pulled it out. So it was pretty amazing.
So some of those early war room conversations, like during those trying times, you probably could tell some stories or not. But like, is what you're seeing now, reading about him on the Twitter kind of tales and what you've seen, is it? Can you recognize some of the early tendencies of him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. So first of all, I think Elon had his first tweet while I was at Tesla. I think it was in 2008 or something. And the thing, the media tend to really perceive Elon as being, super egomaniacal, megalomaniac, whatever. I did not find him that way whatsoever. I thought he was like really hilariously self-deprecating. And you see that, like, do you guys remember last year when he was caught like semi-naked on a jet or on a yacht?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. And
none of us can forget those
remember
pictures.
That? Yeah, it's like seared into your memory.
Yeah.
And someone posted it, and he was getting all of this sort of body shaming shit that women get all the time, right? And he got that, and he posted a picture. Someone posted a picture of like a pug or a Boston Bull Terrier, and he wrote, "Better thighs, though," something like that, with better calves. That was like, to me, I laughed out loud. It was like quintessential, self-deprecating, hilarious, darkly comedic Elon. He's actually really, really funny. So, and again, I actually found him to be quite humble. I think that, the media impression of CEOs is, they just want the top job. In fact, these jobs are grinds. I mean, they're awful jobs on so many levels, right? And Elon used to always say it's like death eating your face every day, or it's like eating glass. Because the nature of the CEO role is that the only things that reach the CEO level is the shit that nobody can solve up until that point, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually really one of the worst jobs in organizations. And so to take on these jobs, it has to be about something else, whether it's money or, in the case of Elon, the mission. And that is what really, really has motivated him. I mean, say what you will about, the Twitter issues. He has done more than probably any single living human being to decarbonize Earth, right? He has forced the entire automotive industry to make electric vehicles that don't suck, that aren't like, retrofitted golf carts. And he has done that through decade or more of incredibly difficult work, 90, 100, 110 hour work weeks. And it's showing a lot of proof points, right? So for Elon, at least back in the day, he never sought out to have a great brand or to even have a great car company or to even be the richest person in the world. He actually set out to have an impact to decarbonize one of the most filthy, vile, in bed with the petrol state industries, which is the car industry, and all of that other shit, having a top brand, having money and a jet and all of that, that's a consequence of actually accelerating the transition to zero emission energy. That's the Elon I know.
Yep.
I want to actually add something. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to move on to Pat Brown, but if you want to continue on.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Yep.
Just because I worked for Amazon back in 98 or whatever. And no, I'm not super wealthy where I should be with the stock price. But I do understand what you're saying about Elon because I worked with Jeff almost directly. Yeah. Like Bezos was there. He was eating lunch with us. I tell Michael that story all the time. He's like, did he really eat lunch with you? I'm like, yeah. We were all just in like one building. And back then there was that same thing you just talked about. Like, what is Jeff Bezos now? I don't know. and people change, right?
Of
and what
course.
is Elon now? I don't know. But back then, he was so focused on the mission. He was just a little nerdy guy in the desk, trying to make it work, trying to sell books. And every single time, like you said, it's a grind. Everybody was on us about making money. And when are we going to turn a profit? And he was like, none of that matters.
Yeah.
He's like, we're throwing all the money back in the business. We're going to be broke. No one's really going to make any money off our stock. We're just going to focus on this thing. So I totally understand that because I saw that in his eyes. And again, I can't speak to him nowadays. But yeah, he was just like laser focused and it was a grind.
Yeah, it's like the biggest disconnect as a former journalist myself, who's then reported to multiple CEOs. It's the biggest delta between reality and fiction in the world of journalists, that these guys are just ego driven. They're just in it for themselves. That might be true at many organizations, but definitely not the ones I've worked for. These guys are getting, like I said, the worst jobs in the company. And yeah, they get some notoriety or glory for it. But if that's all that motivates them, they would not do it. There's way easier ways to make money. And in the case of Elon in particular, there's a saying in Detroit, which is that if you want to make a little money in the auto industry, you start with a lot of money. Right? It is a almost zero margin business in the best case scenario. When another one of my old employers, Nissan, had an 8%, profit margin, that was like record breaking, mind blowing profits. Right. Mm-hmm. And so Elon voluntarily moved into that industry because of the impact that it would have. And it was not about the ego. He didn't name it Musk Motors, right? I mean, it was really about forcing the vile, disgusting incumbent industry to follow Tesla because Tesla is eating its market share. And guess what? They did.
Yeah, and guess what? Online shopping's a thing. And
exactly.
Bezos did the same thing that he was going for too. Anyways, yeah.
And so you went from Elon, Rachel, to go work for Pat Brown, so another iconic CEO, definitely at least in the alternative protein space. And so talk about like that or those early days. Why did you go to work for Impossible?
Okay, so I did a little detour in between. So I spent 3 years working for Tesla, and then I almost randomly bumped into this guy named Carlos Ghosn at Renault Nissan Mitsubishi at an auto show in Paris. And I ended up working for him for about 5 years. Remember, Nissan at the time had done more to industrialize electric vehicle transportation than anyone else. I mean, we were really hand building those Teslas, and Nissan was creating multiple assembly lines for it. So that was quite interesting job too. And as part of that job, I was actually with Carlos Ghosn at COP21 in Paris. And Tom Friedman of the New York Times was moderating a panel with Carlos Ghosn and several other people about how to, accelerate the advent of sustainable transportation, furniture. The CEO of IKEA was there. And I happened to be at this conference, and that's where I met Pat Brown. He was there too. He got invited, and he was doing some closed door stuff. Impossible Foods was still in stealth mode at the time. They were called Meraxi Inc. Didn't
that doesn't
roll off the tongue.
No.
Right? And he came up to me and he basically said, Rachel, what's wrong with your career? And when he said that, I was like, who are you? You are like the biggest blowhard. Like, I have worked for Elon Musk and Carlos Ghosn, and what is wrong with my career? I don't know, because I'm from Detroit and I'm like at the top of my game here. He goes, what is wrong with your career is that you picked the wrong industry. And I was like, what? And he said, you picked the wrong industry because, cars are important. It's good to decarbonize them. But frankly, it's a rounding error compared to agriculture, which is by far the most destructive technology ever created on Earth. And specifically, animal agriculture creates the vast majority of methane and other toxic emissions. And it has done more to not only cause global warming, but torch biodiversity. And he told me this in a very brief conversation, honestly. And I actually didn't believe him because it was so shocking. I went home, went to Paris, back to my apartment. I started researching it. And honestly, very quickly, I discovered, holy shit, he was right. Yeah. I did throw away my career. What am I doing, right? And so after 5 years of, kind of living the dream in Paris, I moved back to, thousands of miles away, moved my family back to the Bay Area to work for Pat. And my first day of real work on the job was when we launched out of stealth mode back in July 2016 at Momofuku Nishi with, David Chang.
Yep.
And it was amazing. And, ultimately, Pat is right. What you eat over the course of your lifetime is more than likely going to have a vastly bigger impact on your personal carbon footprint than anything else you do by a wide margin. Even if you're flying your private Bombardier jet or driving a Cadillac Escalade, it almost is a rounding error compared to what you eat. He was right.
And yeah, so you launched your career in food, and I think you stayed there for a few years. And we'll get into how I connected with you at CES. But I think you then eventually went on to work for the production board with Dave Freeberg, who I think is another iconic CEO.
Absolutely.
He's not as well known, although he's getting there with that podcast of his.
Yeah, he's got the number one podcast in business and technology and investing. So I would say he's pretty well known. And if you go to a place like CES with him, I mean, you saw it, Michael. He's just, the scrum after he walks off a stage is pretty amazing. And
he's Silicon Insider famous.
Yeah,
kind of like my old boss Om Malik, right? Like you tell someone about Om Malik outside of Silicon Valley, no one knows who Om Malik is. Probably the same with Dave Freeberg. But like once you go and get into the Silicon Valley world, they definitely know who he is. Jason Calacanis helps, I think, Dave a little bit with that podcast.
Yeah.
But I love the podcast.
Do you think it's better to be famous in Canada or Silicon Valley famous? Which is better?
Oh, that's interesting. They're two different things. They're two different things.
Yeah, Canada's definitely smaller.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Nice. By the way, Jason and Molly are still doing a show together. Because I used to work with them. You mentioned the CNET connection. I think we have connections that way, too, because I used to work with IDG.
Oh, Molly's awesome.
I used to work with PC World and Macworld as well. And so they're still doing it. And they just transferred over some content to TikTok. That's how I see some of the new stuff. So.
Yeah. No, Molly is great. She's killing it.
Yeah. We're going to make a roundabout return to Dave and talk about CS. But I want to go into the first news story of the day because it directly relates to Pat Brown and Impossible. I think, Rachel, you and I were talking offline about the hullabaloo caused by this Bloomberg article.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think has the entire plant-based meat world all a Twitter or whatever.
Man.
But like it created a tectonic shockwave, I think, in the world of plant-based meat. Basically, what they did is it was an article that was titled "Fake Meat Was Supposed to Save the World. It Became Just Another Fad," and it basically focused a lot on the struggles of Beyond and Impossible. It reminded me of Bloomberg has a tendency to write these articles that basically are death knells, or I guess obituaries for industries and for companies. You guys remember the Juicero article?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That was the Bloomberg wrote that. And I got called from the reporter before she put that out. She wanted me as a source. And she hadn't latched onto the whole, I remember, if you guys remember the stories about how you could squeeze the bags instead of actually the machine.
Yep.
She hadn't got onto that angle yet. But that story effectively killed Juicero. Their venture capitalists backed out, et cetera. I'm not drawing the conclusion that this article is going to kill the plant-based meat industry. I don't think that's the case at all. But it definitely has caused a lot of waves.
Yeah, I mean, it causes a lot of waves when, the day that it's published, at least 10 separate people texted me early, the second it was published, right? I mean, I have a lot to unpack, both as a journalist and as, the former head of comms at Impossible Foods for 5 years and others. I mean, I actually think that the article itself, when you start to read it, is fairly objective, to be really honest. Had a terrible headline, That's, as you know, usually not the journalist's fault. They don't even write it, right? Had a terrible photo of this like sad, weird.
Oh, I hated that photo.
Yeah, what was up with that
whatever.
picture? Yeah.
They're trying to make it unappealing. They're trying to be like, yeah, it's over. No,
but the article itself was not, rife with errors or anything like that. It was just very, selectively, selective viewpoint on the industry. And frankly, all this does is mirror the Gartner hype cycle, the classic Gartner hype cycle, right? So, Gartner, the analyst firm, 20 years ago created this thing called the hype cycle, which is that any new technology goes whoop, and the media go insane, celebrities, venture capitalists, everyone gloms on. And then there's this inevitable deflation or pop and drop or whatever you call it when reality hits. Oh my God, it's not going to change the world next year like we said it could, et cetera. But then it continues to increase and continues to have transformative effect. We saw this very clearly at Tesla with electric vehicles. Back in the early day, 2008, 2009, there was this other guy, Henrik Fisker. He had a car company. Everyone would compare us, used to drive Elon and me absolutely batshit insane because it was like a completely different car and completely different technology, hybrid technology, completely different person. He was a designer, Henrik Fisker, compared to Tesla, which was just so deeply rooted in electrical engineering and the science behind battery technology, pure battery technology car. But of course, the journalists make all of these comparisons. Then Fisker, has a huge string of problems. And of course, you get this spate of articles, including the classic, Bloomberg Businessweek cover article. It's dead, stick a fork in it, effectively. But guess what? Now Tesla is like the hottest car company on the planet. It has, 50% of the market share for electric vehicles. Its capitalization is worth more than all of the 10 next automakers combined or something. And, things move on, right? Same thing is going to happen with plant-based meat. And the reason is because the fundamental thesis of Pat Brown that he got me to come to work for him for is right. We cannot continue to torch. Half of the planet right now is taken up by agriculture. Virtually all of that is animal ag. And we can't continue to torch biodiversity, have this level of emissions, and have this level of water, land, and energy use for a food product, meat, that at this point we all know is just kind of a luxury option. It is not a need to have. So ultimately, this article is going to become just another sort of in the parade of classical stick a fork in it journalism articles that will be proven wrong. I don't expect Dina Shanker, the reporter who I know very well, and she's a very diligent reporter. I don't think she's going to come back in a year or two and say, oh, mea culpa, I was wrong. That's not the mode of journalism. But yeah, I definitely see this as like the sort of local nadir. Plant-based meat went from zero to, stratospheric 2019, the year of the Beyond IPO, and Burger King, at Impossible Whopper at Burger King, et cetera. Now it's in a little dip. But the fundamental thesis is absolutely more relevant than ever. So trust me when I say it is not a fad. This is here to stay.
So you saw a whole spate of think pieces and reactions from entrepreneurs within the space, a lot on LinkedIn, a lot of people writing blog posts, etc. You also saw Impossible put out, I think, a full-page ad in the New York Times, and then also a link to their website where they basically had an article reacting to it. But the full-page article, I think, just quoted, I think, a Reddit post that essentially said that this is an option at a lot of restaurants. It's actually fairly reasonable. But from a comms perspective, I don't know if it's quite a crisis, but they definitely take it pretty seriously. How you saw them react is kind of how you would have responded?
No, I mean, I don't work at Impossible. I don't pretend to speak for the company whatsoever. I think that, directionally, I might have done something similar. I would have, had a blog post. Pat or I would have, cranked out a blog post in response. And then when journalists ask us about it, we'd say, here, check out this article. Here are the mistakes or the biases or the perceived, failures of the article. But I definitely personally wouldn't have taken out an ad in the New York Times. I mean, a full page ad in the New York Times is like $150,000. I would rather do I don't know, 150 awesome Carlos produced TikTok videos to raise awareness.
Thank you.
There we go. There we go.
It would have done better. Would have went viral.
Way better.
Come
on, a couple podcasts on the
CES.
spoon. Come on.
Yeah, whatever. Like that to me was, the lady doth protest a little much there.
Yeah.
But, I think that, trying to do a clap back, I would have taken more of like a ironic or flippant or, deprecating approach, not a classical sort of big company, big industry incumbent move. Like, let's take a ad out in the New York Times.
Yeah.
That's not my jam.
Is that an indicator of where the company is now? I mean, if you look at Impossible, right, it seems like Pat Brown has been put on special projects. I don't really know what he's doing at this point. He seems a little less involved with the day-to-day. You have the new guy, I think he came from, what, was it Nestle?
Chobani,
I think Peter McGinnis or something.
Yeah. More
of a traditional big CPG guy. I mean, I'm not calling Impossible a company in crisis, but, it definitely seems like they need to probably come up with, I think, a new line of products in addition to what they've already done, and they're innovating. When I saw that Pat was put on special projects, I thought that's what he was doing. I'm not so sure now. But,
yeah.
I mean, where is the company now as an observer from outside? Where do you think?
Yeah, well, as an observer, I mean, a lot of what you say is not wrong. It's a little bit woven into why I left Impossible. I mean, I was there for 5 years. It was amazing, like the most transformative 5 years of certainly of the company, of my career for sure. It was absolutely spectacular. I mean, like I said, I joined Meraxi Inc., this little company in stealth mode, right, that Vinod Khosla had, a fetish about. And then suddenly, it had become this real juggernaut, and it raised massive awareness, not just of the Impossible brand, which, again, remember our early conversation about Elon, right? Whether the Impossible brand is a success or not is less important, frankly, for a mission-driven company than educating people on how awful, expensive, and, earth-torching the incumbent industry actually is. And I would say from that perspective, mission accomplished on that one, right? Every single JBS, Cargill, Unilever, all of them have their own, impossible killer projects, right? That they're trying to come up with, fungus and pea protein and everything else. And I think that the whole world understands very well that continued sustained levels of meat consumption is going to be catastrophic. So I actually think that that's just still more true today than ever before. And that Impossible has had a huge, tremendous impact on the industry when you get the U.S. Cattlemen's Association and its little, propaganda disinformation agency called the Center for Consumer Freedom, run by Richard Berman, Dr. Evil, to take out Super Bowl ads and to go on essentially, deep-pocketed campaign trashing plant-based meat, right? So, Impossible has had a really, really positive effect. And that is all on Pat. I mean, he did all of that because he really had this vision of eliminating the need for animal ag. And again, just as true today as it was 3 weeks ago before the Bloomberg article.
Pat and Ethan, I think, with Beyond as well.
Yeah.
Let me add to that real quick, Michael. I just wanted to say, what you said earlier, I was biting my tongue because it's such an important thing about the progress has already been made, right?
Exactly.
Like this idea, the success of Impossible, the success of Beyond and all these other companies, it getting into the mainstream and getting into understanding it's in my grocery store. It's in the frozen section now. It's not just like a specialty product. I grew up in the olden days when, Morningstar, Worthington, there was like two brands that did this.
Boca,
and it was weird, you had to go to a special store to get them. So I think that's really the big thing. Yes, this problem is big, like you said, and it's not going anywhere, just the agricultural aspect. But I think the inroads of what's been made, you know what I mean, is already done.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The fact that you can pick it up at Burger King, and get Impossible, that's just normal. And so I think that normalcy of it is huge, like we said earlier, with Amazon and Jeff Bezos, online shopping. He wanted to get that to be a thing, right?
Yeah.
So veggie, soy food,
Thank
impossible.
goodness we moved beyond the Boca Burger too, right? I always thought it was just like free. That was like just frozen, like free-fried beans compressed into.
There's a lot of beans. There's a lot of beans.
Yeah,
a lot of beans going on there.
But just so many more options.
The other thing to mention, though, is not just that, JBS, Unilever, Nestle, everyone is trying to create their own fake impossible burgers right now. The other really important thing that Pat uniquely did because of his nexus in Silicon Valley and Vinod Khosla as the initial seed investor, they actually really helped blow open the food tech sector as we know it. There are now dozens of venture-funded companies, including Cellular Ag and others. There are also an incredible number of, like R&D labs that are doing this so that the big companies don't have to do it all on their own. I'm on the board of one called Shiru, which is an amazing company doing work for major ingredients manufacturers globally on every aspect of precision fermentation and alt protein discovery and scale up, right? And so really Impossible and Beyond helped create this ecosystem that is really, really powerful. And that's something that Tesla could never do just because of the extremely high barriers to entry and costs in the auto industry. In the food industry, I think there's actually a lot more room. I think there's room for 20 Impossibles and 50 Shirus and all of these companies that are proliferating. And I think that is the future of food now more than ever.
Yep. And this week I wrote a story about a couple new innovation hubs. So not only do you have like all the venture funding, private capital going in, you have government money flowing in now.
Yeah.
New York City just announced a new innovation hub with Mayor Adams putting in, I think, $20 million, part of his program. I think last year we saw Gavin Newsom earmark $5 million in California. And, last week, and kind of this is a segue to the next story, a lot of the conversation at the Tufts University Cellular Ag State of the State confab was about how we need more government money to really go into these alternative protein, both research as well as production. And a lot of the conversation was about how we need to really up the production capacity. And this is a space you're a little more skeptical about than me in terms of like cellular agriculture and cell cultivated meat. But a lot of the conversation from folks like from GFI and on that side at this Mark Post, who helped create the first cultivated hamburger, he was there as well, was we really need to move to the big billions of dollars going into the infrastructure for lab grown meat and that type of thing. And so I think it's related to plant-based meat. I think it's kind of also in kind of part of the conversation. You're not as big a fan on the cellular ag side.
Well, back up a sec. So we can talk about cellular ag separately. The bigger question that you're posing here is a massive government intervention going to solve this? And I am hardly some kind of Silicon Valley crazeballs libertarian at all. But I think we can just look at history and say that's not going to work, right? I don't think that, if it were so easy that the government could just somehow magically mandate electric vehicles or something, like that just doesn't happen, right?
How much money did Elon and Tesla get that from the government?
Yeah. So that's a really good one. So basically the doors of Sand Hill Road, Menlo Park, were shut. The venture capital industry we couldn't get any money for Tesla. We did get a $485 million federal low interest loan from the Department of Energy in about December 2008. Again, that helped keep the lights on, but that is nothing in the world of auto industry. I mean, that is nothing. It costs at minimum $1 billion to create a new car platform. And we were trying to do that with a whole new powertrain, right? But it was enough to keep the lights on, right? But then think about it from this perspective. So, between, 2010 and 2020, really, Tesla decided to take this crazy, crazy risk of building its own supercharger network, right? Early on in 2010 to 2015, there was this idea in the incumbent industry that was like, well, it's a chicken and egg problem. People don't want electric vehicles because there's no charging infrastructure. There's no charging infrastructure, ergo, we're not going to make a lot of electric vehicles, right? Elon looked at that and was just like, absolutely, fuck that. No, we're just going to go straight for it and make our own supercharger network so that we can eliminate this whole fantasy concept of range anxiety and make these cars into road trip cars, right? And he did that. And Tesla gained more and more and more and more market share, while literally all of the incumbents, and I know because I was working at several of them simultaneously, Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, all of them said, no, we're just going to wait for the government to do it. We're going to wait for little startups and NGOs and every sort of apartment and condo association. They can all do that piece of it. It's too hard. We're not going to do it. Well, guess what? Tesla took all of that market share, right? And now it is almost impossible for the incumbents to catch up. So waiting for some fictional government loan or policy or program is not a panacea. It will not work.
I would agree, though. I mean, I think the EV industry accelerated to a certain degree because a lot of the rebates that were funded by tax refunds or rebates, that helped. I mean, Elon's taken a ton of money for SpaceX.
Acceleration, right? Acceleration.
Yeah, it accelerates. I'm not saying that the government's going to build a bunch of bioreactors, but I think tax incentives or whatever for big companies. There's a ton of big companies on the bioreactor, biomanufacturing side that are going to build out anyway. Yeah. But if they have the proper tax incentives through the U.S. or other governments, I think that's really what they're talking about.
And that's it. And I also think, you also need to assume that the government right now, it's not an even playing field even today in either electric vehicles or plant-based meat, right? Because there's effectively so many subsidies for the incumbent technology, internal combustion engines or animal-derived meat, because we don't properly account for the devastation, right? For the methane, for the biodiversity collapse. So, it's not an even playing field. I will acknowledge that. And I definitely acknowledge that some government, evening of those playing fields, leveling would help. But to just presume that there could be some massive government infusion, I mean, maybe that'll happen in the Netherlands or Singapore or Israel or somewhere else, but I don't see it happening here.
So let's move on to the next story, and then we're going to get to CES and talk about that because we were all there. I didn't get COVID there; I got it afterwards. But but one of the things that you've been playing with, Carlos, is ChatGPT. I've been looking a lot at generative AI in terms of how it can impact the food world, and I'm actually putting on a little event in about 3 weeks to talk about just that. But I don't know, Rachel, have you been playing with ChatGPT, seeing kind of trying to write poems or write copy?
Oh, I love it. In fact, I started playing with it in December when my 17-year-old son came home from Dartmouth, his freshman year at Dartmouth, and he had just taken a class called The Ethics of the Internet. And I was like, oh my God, had you been in this class one more week before winter break started, you would have talked about this ChatGPT because it has just exploded, and I love it. I'm completely addicted. We were just the other day at work, we were just saying, give me a sonnet in the form of Dave Friedberg about the advantages of cell and gene therapies. Boop. And
how did you train it? How did you train it on Dave Friedberg's voice?
You just give him, you give ChatGPT a bunch of the blog posts that Dave has already written in his authentic, true voice. And then it parrots stuff out. And obviously it wasn't even close to correct or something publishable, but it was absolutely hilarious. We were all just doubled over laughing.
Yeah, I was my hot take, which is not even a hot take, but it's just a normal thing that's going to be part of our lives. There's going to be a moment where it's going to displace a lot of jobs and it's going to cause a lot of issues. But right now I'm telling all my friends, I've been using it since it wasn't even called ChatGPT when it was just early OpenAI. But just mess around with it, use it, understand prompting, because the biggest thing is understanding its language. It's just like HTML or coding language or whatever you want to think of. Just like Midjourney and some of the AI art stuff, if you understand how to code in this language or talk to AI in this way, then you can get great valuable feedback and output. So beyond the poetry and stuff like that, just copy for websites, copy for whatever you might need it for, but also just thinking of your own content in a different way. You can plug in your own content into an AI model, and it can let you see things maybe you didn't even see. So
I would argue
yeah.
it's not just about content. I actually think that we're seeing a real transformative moment in the history of civilization and our species, Homo sapiens. We sort of started 150,000 years ago as these hunter-gatherers. Then we moved into agriculture, which obviously helped our brains get even bigger, and it proliferated towns and cities and religion and all of these other things. And then we sort of moved into this industrial revolution, manual laborer economy, right? And then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the service economy. My dad was a big part of that. He was one of the first generation of computer programmers back in the day. And then we moved more recently from the sort of service economy to the creator economy, right? That's kind of tip of the spear in the world. You guys are obviously, perfect examples of that. And I think going forward, as you have ChatGPT doing a lot of the content for you, you have DALL-E doing a lot of the art, you have Valley, doing the voice stuff, right? Like podcasts and stuff. Then you get to something else for humans, which we at TPB frame as the narrator economy. So it's not enough to just be a talking head, a pundit, a content generator, a creator. You have to actually go one step above on the stack, right? You have to be
100%.
the narrator of this.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to have pretty profound implications, obviously for marketing, but for the economy as a whole.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, I totally agree with you. Like, content is the beginning part of it, right?
Yep.
And that's what I was saying. It's like ubiquitous. It's going to be just part of the process. But it's almost like when you were saying that, I was thinking of like Library of Alexandria and the thinkers.
Yeah.
Like, having extra time to do other things. But that's why I'm so adamant about people understanding it and using it now, because get familiar and comfortable with how it works. Because now you have to look at your next job, right? Like,
exactly.
How are you going to do the next piece? And so, by the way, with DID, which I don't know if you guys have checked out DID, you can do talking avatars. You'll be able to do video, and full-on video will be really, really soon. So, yeah, it's definitely like understanding it, and then like how can we work with it to be on top of, like working with it on top of it,
No, I think there's going to be not just video, but the first symphony orchestra, the first video game that you personally, Carlos, can create.
Yeah, they're doing games
you
right
as the
now.
hero,
Yep.
all of that stuff. The first novel.
He's always making himself the hero. That's just
I
Carlos.
am. That's just me. That's me.
But that's okay. Well, I think a lot of the innovation will also come on API integration, and we've already seen that in the restaurant tech industry. A company called ClearCogs did an API integration with their back-of-house restaurant management tool with ChatGPT.
So yeah.
I wrote a story about that. So clearly a lot more to come on that. If you guys want to know more, come to our event on February 15th. Rachel, you got to come to that?
Am I going to the event? Jeez Louise, I want to.
I'm not letting you in.
But I know it all. I know the AI.
You make it all about you. Carl.
We're friends. AI and I are friends. I'll be at the event. I'm going to break in.
He's got your voice, and you've already got a real.
Oh, that's right. You already have me.
I've already created a Carlos.
You made a DID version of Carlos, which, by the way, I was going to do and just replace myself.
You.
You replaced me. Okay.
But hey, let's move on to the final chapter of the podcast where we talk about and do a little bit of CES wrap up. And I couldn't have a better guest for this because, we talk a lot about how, the Spoon was really kind of helping CES get food tech up and going and kind of get the program running. We had the food tech conference we ran for them. But really, the origin story and a lot of what I pitched to CES when I said, hey, you guys need to have food tech, I pointed to the Impossible activation and how Impossible debuted the Impossible 2.0 burger there. And guess who created that, Carlos? Who's the person behind that?
Is it Rachel?
It's Rachel.
Hey.
Rachel was the one.
It was with a big team. I will say that. A lot of support. But, yeah, that was great.
I'm just going to say
it
was just Rachel. It was just Rachel doing it all.
Yeah,
So I showed up at CES with the Spoon team, and this was 2019, January 2019.
Yep.
I brought a camera guy. I had Catherine Lamb with me. I had Chris Albrecht. And we showed up at the Impossible press conference, and this is the first time I'd ever seen Pat in person. And Rachel took the stage and kind of just said, hey, we have a great night ahead of us, and you guys are cooking Impossible burgers. The chef was cooking them on the grill. And first of all, I was kind of blown away by Pat because I had never heard his spiel on kind of how, like, I think kind of what he told you, I think in Europe was kind of the same kind of passionate spiel he made on stage. It was very convincing. And but that activation, a lot of journalists afterwards wrote that that Impossible won CES, and no one was expecting this. You had all the drones, the robots, the autonomous vehicles, etc. And then Impossible does this little press conference and introduced the 2.0 burger, and you guys, in a way, stole the show. Talk a little bit about how that happened. How did that come together?
Oh, man. So basically, I started at Impossible in 2016, and, by the end of the first year of 2016 that I worked there, we were in 4 restaurants. Okay, not 400,000 or 4. And we literally had PhD biochemists, these brilliant biochemists, hand pressing patties in the back room, right? It was that manual and DIY. By 2017 and 2018, we started going into better burger chains, right? We were in Red Robin, then we hit White Castle. Wow, this was pretty interesting. And at that point, we had created a production facility in Oakland to start manufacturing for realsies. And at the same time, the heme team and the biochemistry team in general were like, we're going to do a new formulation that is more robust. I don't know if you tried those early Impossible burgers. They were made from wheat gluten, and they also had a real problem dissolving effectively. You couldn't barbecue them. If you had them in the hands of a top chef, which is why we packaged them with top chefs, by the way, they were great, but they didn't perform the same way that, conventional animal-derived beef performed. And this next iteration, Impossible Burger 2.0, was made from soy, which has a much better flavor profile, much better health and nutrition profile, and is also it's just a much better product. And we wanted to launch it somewhere. And we thought about, trying to do our own standalone event, that kind of thing. But I had been to CES at that point probably 8 or 10 times as both a journalist and as an auto industry person. And I thought, wow, what a better place to not only launch a product, because, that first year that we were there were 180,000 people at CES, but also what a great place to really explode the sort of bullshit mythology, quaint notion that conventional incumbent food industry pushes, which is that food is natural. Food is not natural. Food is and always has been a process between nature and science, always. It is always technology. Everything from the organic banana that you just bought at Whole Foods, it looks nothing like a banana from 200 years ago, right? All the way through to the synbio revolution. And I thought, wow, what a great place to talk about that, to have that optic in the background, right? And really lean into some provocative notions. And so I called this great friend, Sarah Brown, who was at the time head of media at CTA, Consumer Technology Association, the trade group that runs CES. And I was like, look, we got no money, and I don't know what we do, and you've never had a food product before on stage. Is there any way we could do this? I actually have a feeling that this would be pretty steal the internet for 24-hour news cycle if we could do it, because the product is absolutely mind-blowing. And she made a few phone calls, and she was, called back and said, absolutely, let's do it. And so within probably, 2 weeks, I kind of vetted it internally. It was very controversial internally. The CES thing was incredibly controversial. A lot of people said internally, people don't want to eat technology. Rachel and Pat are just going nuts on some strange thing.
Internally? And that's weird.
Yeah.
Huh.
Interestingly, Carlos, the most controversial thing was probably the nomenclature using 2.0, because that's so techy, right? And people were like, no, we want to be all natural. And we're like, fuck that. None of the stuff.
Well, talk to your audience.
Natural,
talk to your audience, and your audience understands.
So Pat is a zealot. I don't know, but he's a true believer, right?
Yeah.
But he also is smart, so he got on board with the 2.0. Saw
Pat saw it immediately, and then David Lee, who was our CFO and COO at the time, he's like, I'll fund this. I love it, So yeah, go Rachel, do it. So once, the way things work internally, once you have the CEO's buy-in and then you have the CFO who's willing to bankroll it, it was like game on, baby. And so we put together super bare bones, super bare we had this event at Border Grill in the Mandalay Bay. Mary Sue Milliken, incredible chef. She was willing to do it.
I was at. Yep.
And we had this event. We had like a fire marshal limit of 350 people, and there were like 500 people there. We ran out of burger. We ran out of tequila, which is like a cardinal sin, right, at a journalism event. And it was great. It was stratospheric. And by the way, props to CES on this one. This is where we nailed I think it was a $350 million funding round. David Lee had so many meetings with investors. And we also nailed the deal with Burger King there, because CES has actually become a pretty big event for corporate dev of
That's what I keep telling people. You got to go to food tech at CES, man. That's where it's at.
Yeah. And so the CES team really seized on this. And then in subsequent years, thanks to Michael and the team there, they've made it a whole proper track. And this year, I was really, really delighted to see. I mean, there were, dozens and dozens of exhibitors in food tech. There were hundreds of people willing to pay the extra $400 for the food tech track.
Pretty specimen.
And Michael's party at Canyonita in the Venetian was by far the best party of all of CES. It was amazing.
It was killer.
Yeah.
It was a fun party.
Yeah.
And so I think you're iconic in kind of that history. And by the way, the spoon was the only one that, and you realized the second year you needed to have a camera there. We were the only one that recorded that press conference. So you can go to the Spoon, YouTube channel, actually watch Pat's press conference.
Oh yeah,
nice.
We didn't have anything. We didn't have a malt box. We were just like winging it, right? Because it came together. I'm not joking. It came together in like late November of 2018 for 2019. So it was pretty tight. But it was amazing.
It was amazing, and and you guys came back the next year. I think that was where you unveiled sausage or pork.
Yep.
And I think a lot of the conversation then was like how this is going to roll out in Asia. I think a lot of the focus was Asia market, and so and then COVID hit, so we took a year off. But we're back in full swing this year, and thank you for coming out. You brought with you Dave Freeberg. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I pronounced it Freeberg. I got it right this time. On the first time I announced his name on stage, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
I got a dirty look.
I think you said.
I got a dirty look from, I think his wife. Like, what did you mispronounce?
Did you say Freeberg? Did you say Freeberg?
It's Friedberg. It's Freeberg. I pronounce it Freiberg because it's Fried, and I'm a very literal guy apparently. But But Dave, I knew Dave would be like amazing on stage, and he delivered. So it was a fun panel. We had also Jasmine Hume from Shiru. We also had Poe Bronson, one of my longtime favorite authors on stage as well. So that was a fun conversation.
That was great.
But and thanks for talking about like the exhibitors. Like there were tons of exhibitors. I think we need more. I think we need more future food exhibitors, etc.
Yeah. Well, someone was asking me at your party. They were asking me what do we need to really take the food tech track to the next level and really elevate it to the same level as the automotive track. Because, when I first started covering the auto industry back in the 90s as a cub reporter at the Detroit Free Press, all of the journalists would go to the Detroit Auto Show, LA, Tokyo, and there's one that alternates between Paris and Frankfurt. And that was sort of the circuit. And then CES made this incursion into the auto industry. And that first, everyone started launching autonomous technology or maybe some variant EV or maybe some hybrid technology with like this really clunky old display. Now it's where all of the proper car launches are. And it has really decimated the media participation in these regional shows like Detroit, Paris, Frankfurt, Beijing and Shanghai, Tokyo, et cetera. And I think you could do the same thing in the food sector and really elevate it to a proper track. And so someone was asking me, what would it take, Rachel, to get us to that level? And I said, I don't know if it's Impossible Foods or someone else. They got to launch steak at CES in a really big way, like a proper, awesome, juicy steak. That will blow up the internet.
Yeah, I agree. I think cultivated meat has to have some tastings there. Like these really cool futuristic products. Yeah. I remember when you guys launched sausage, the second year, and some of my Jewish friends were like,
Yeah.
they were so excited because they could taste sausage. Like, you
Yeah.
know, it's like, hey,
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
never
yeah.
had sausage before. So, like, and this was the first time in 2019 that most journalists had tried an Impossible. So,
Yeah.
and they had heard about it. So I think those opportunities are pretty exciting for journalists, and then
Yeah.
they tend to write about them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, CES is, this year they had 115,000 people, which is great. It's, getting back to old levels. They had 8,000 journalists and they had 10,000 investors. So again, it's not just about the journalists. I mean, that's awesome for me and the, shameless comms and marketing people there, but it's also for corp dev, for investor relations, for M&A. It's a real rich mix, I would say.
Oh yeah, you walk around and I was like, oh, you're like the head of everything for Tyson. Okay, hi.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
It's
that's
really
just normal
surprising.
now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and they were all at the happy hour. We had Uma Valetti with
Yep.
Upside and a lot of the investors. So, well, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation, Rachel. We covered a lot of ground, and I'm looking forward to having you back next year after CES. So we can talk about it as well. So,
yeah, this would be great.
And always enjoy listening to some of your stories. And we'll have another podcast. You just tell us more Elon stories.
Yeah, and I'll say more
God.
Bezos stories, and we can do both.
I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, let's do
All right,
it.
all right.
That's great. Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. This has been a
so
lot of fun.
much.
All right,
so much
thank
fun.
you.
Bye.
Don't hang up. Don't hang up yet. Let me hit
Okay,
stop
yeah, you
recording.
can't hang up. Don't hang up because